Just a brief follow-up to my video earlier on Michael Jackson and the Finding Neverland documentary. I'm watching another unauthorized documentary right now, made after Jackson's death, and it's exploring some of these things, although not in any sort of major detail. It's just surface exploration. But they brought up Toya Jackson and the time in the early 1990s when she publicly basically denounced her brother. Now, this is something I think that is worth really considering. I'm going to put a link in this video to a video which is somewhat sensationally titled Toya Jackson Exposes Her Brother. This all depends on perspective, of course. But at least, if you're sort of wavering, at least look at the interview and form your own conclusion. So basically, a bit of context here. Early 1990s, at the time of the Jason Chandler um, allegations, Toya Jackson was the one member of the Jackson family who expressed doubt about her brother's innocence. And basically, she said that she loved her brother, but she could not stand by having seen checks that were to be paid to the victim and say that she thought he was innocent. She couldn't stand by and see injustice. So her point of view was that while she loved her brother, she felt stronger about not seeing innocent children, as she put it, abused. And she also put it that how could anyone honestly say that it would be normal for a 35-year-old man to sleep with children? 35, that's 2 years older than myself now. This is quite significant because the Toya Jackson was basically castigated both by the Jackson family and by Michael Jackson fans, which isn't surprising. Now, critics say that she was being controlled by an abusive husband by the name of Jack Gordon. It is true they had a very turbulent marriage, but I don't really see how that connects to her position on her brother's guilt or innocence. As far as I know, she's never retracted that. Even after I understand the husband passed away in 2005, she's never said, "Oh, well, that was my husband being manipulative, just trying to have a feud with the Jackson family." So I see that as independent from what I've seen. Um, Even if people believe that the two guys featured in Finding Neverland are phonies and they're just out for money, and again, I emphasize I haven't seen this documentary and I haven't yet watched the rebuttal documentaries, but my gut feeling is still that superfans will never be interested in hearing both sides. They'll never be interested in even humoring the idea that there might be a dark side to Michael Jackson because they are biased. They are institutionally incapable of critical thinking when it comes to their idol. You just have to look at the sort of comments that hardcore Michael Jackson fans leave. Michael was all about love. Michael done all this for charity. Michael was a great man. Michael was this, that, and the other. And that's what cult of celebrity does. It gives people this mentality that they just don't seem to be capable of looking at things from another perspective. And that's really unfortunate. The Toya Jackson was totally vilified. Now, bear in mind, this is 25 years ago. We're talking about a quarter of a century ago. And yet these claims are coming up again. So you can believe Jermaine Jackson's perspective. Why can't they just let the man rest? My family's being dogged by this. And that might be a valid argument. But Michael Jackson and his siblings themselves were arguably victims of abuse of a very controlling father, not sexual abuse, but physical abuse. I mean, that's well documented that Joe Jackson was a very controlling man with a bad temper. Anyway, I'll put a link to that interview. I'll let you judge for yourself. My gut feeling is she is speaking from a point of view of conviction, that she believed she had to speak out, that her loyalty to her brother was less important than telling the truth about child abuse. I'm still not saying that, I think he was definitely guilty, but I would put this question to hardcore Michael Jackson fans. How can you, with a straight face, say that it was normal for an adult man to sleep with children and say that is a normal thing? And I just don't buy this thing that Jermaine Jackson came out with. Oh, there were slumber parties. Anyone else, people would look at that with serious questions. At best, it was inappropriate. At best, you could say Michael Jackson was incredibly naive. He was a man child. It's true that he had no childhood, and maybe there's an aspect of that in it. Certainly, his entire public persona was of a kind of child in a man's body. But, I mean, he wasn't stupid. He must have known, the perception that people would have had. So at best, he was a bit naive to think that there would have been no negative perception of what he was doing in terms of a man sleeping with children. So anyway, I'll put a link to that interview. She was speaking from Tel Aviv. I mean, she'd been castigated from the family. She was vilified at the time. She probably is still vilified to some extent today. And her own private life was pretty turbulent. I suspect in part because of the polarization that she got from her stance on this. That's really unfortunate. All I would say is people need to think for themselves. You cannot be blinded because of your love for Michael Jackson, the celebrity. I'm not saying he was guilty. All I'm saying is if you think it's normal for a grown man to sleep with children, even if you think he's innocent, at the very least, you need to acknowledge that should raise some questions. That's all. Doesn't mean he's guilty. It's not evidence he was a paedophile, but in the predatory sense. But it wasn't normal. Just wasn't.